We're going to talk about the Desmos graphing calculator, which is a super great tool, but you do need to understand some of the things that you can change on the settings in order to really make it work for you. So I'm using my sample data set, the US life expectancy for all people, and I've got it kind of hiding here in a folder, got all these different points, and I have all of them typed in, and it looks like this tiny little blob. But it's not a tiny little blob. When I think about where my data set starts in the year 1950 and where it goes to the year 2019. I also want to pay attention to what's happening in the y-axis. The biggest life expectancy I'm seeing is just short of 80 years. The lowest life expectancy I'm seeing is just above 68 years. So since the scale right now is showing me up to X 5,000 and up to Y almost 2,000, it kind of makes sense why it's looking really clustered here. Okay, and if I try to zoom in manually, that's a fine thing to do. I can zoom in manually. The other thing to note too is when you're trying to just stretch the y-axis, if you kind of pinch only along the y, you can stretch that y-axis. You can also do the same thing just stretching along the x-axis. So that could be a good solution. Okay, but you might end up with kind of a flat graph like this. So one thing that might be a little bit better to do is let's click on this little gear, this little wrench up here. And I want to set my x-axis scale. So since we're going from the year 1940 until about 2019, right now it's set at 1940 to 2031, which is not bad. But I'm going to change this to about 2025. And our life expectancy is not nearly as young as 36. So I'm going to change this from about 65 until, I don't know, maybe 90. Now, the other thing I'm going to do, our x-axis is going to be the year. So I'm going to title that year. And now you can see it kind of popped up down here. Our y-axis is showing life expectancy. So I'm going to change that there. One thing I like to do is right now Desmos has it set as small font. I'm going to click here, make it bigger font. It just makes it look nicer. You can choose to unselect the minor grid lines if you don't like kind of that noise in your graph. I'm going to leave mine on. You can decide. And there's like a couple other things you could play around with here, but those are the big things that you're going to want to pay attention to. Now I've got a graph that's just a lot more helpful when I'm trying to take my screenshot. It's got my X and Y axis labeled. It's set at an appropriate scale so that I can get a really clear picture of what's happening in this data.